armed with the knowledge of our basic 3 types of blending modes, this is what it looks like in practice. So we get to part of our image, and really what I want to do is get towards this final here. So I've got like a black cloth tacked up to the wall, and on top of that I've got these various documents. So if I want to start by just turning this underpainting into the black cloth, let's take a look at how the detail differs. You can see it's a little bit more contrasty, although not really very much. And it's got both darker details and lighter details. So to me, the black cloth looks like a good opportunity for an overlay blending mode, one of those mid-value ones. And that's how this stuff starts. I find a photo of the detail I'm looking for, hopefully one that's in kind of a useful perspective. And I know what type of overlay I want to make it. And I actually do my adjustments in a different document. So what are my goals? I want it to be grayscale, I want it to be low contrast, and generally mid-tone. Here's where a couple tools become really, really handy. I think the histogram is extremely useful. And then also I'm going to be using lots of adjustment layers. So I'm going to change my layout just a bit here from my normal videos to maximize my space. This is my properties panel where my adjustment layers are going to be edited. And then down here are the values in the image. I'm going to set this to luminosity, which is what I really want to focus on. And now I can start getting specific. I'm going to use a levels adjustment layer first. And here what I'm doing is I'm just going to lower the overall contrast by bringing these 2 points towards each other. And what we're looking at down here in the histogram are the results. And this is all non-destructive, so I can tweak as much as I want. Nothing is ever flattened. My goal here is to get the general values centered around 50%. And if you want to, you can get really, really accurate with this. I generally trust my eye, but as you're learning, I think a nice tool to use is in the info panel. Get this one out here. We go to the color sampler tool, which is hidden underneath the eyedropper. And I'm going to put down a point on what I perceive to be a mid-tone. So if the top of the wrinkle is the highlight and this is the shadow, I want kind of a middle value. So I'll pick that one. And this is now called number 1. And so in my info panel, in the lower left-hand corner here, we have number 1. And I'm going to change what number 1 tells me to be HSB, which is hue, saturation, and brightness. I don't care about hue. I don't care about saturation in this case. What I really want to know is B, or brightness. This should generally be 50% because that's what I'm going for. Details that are low contrast, centered on 50%. With these 3 tools, I can now take all the guesswork out of it. Using my adjustment knob here, this is where I'm actually making the change in my levels adjustment layer, I can begin to shift this around. What I'm watching is this 53% right now, although the number changes every change I make, but I want to see if I can nudge that to be exactly 50. So right now it's too high, which means I need to darken the image a bit. And I darken until, oh, there we go. Ooh, yeah, okay. So the point I've picked here is 50%. Now, obviously the entire image is not 50%. When I want to know more about the entire image, I look at my histogram. And my histogram is telling me it is a narrow range of value because it's a very narrow stripe that's tall. That means low contrast, good. I know it's centered around 50%, so that's good. I'd say I'm happy with that. What I can do now is just make a selection, do a merged copy, Control-Shift-C, go back into my document and paste. And you can see it's way too big. I'm going to bring it down a bit. And hopefully you've already watched the video about edge control and selections, so we're not going to go into that detail here. But what I do is I make a group. I've isolated the group with a mask. So I pull this into textile and now it's in the right place. Beyond that, I'm also going to change the entire group to the overlay blending mode, because remember, that was the entire goal of this process. And then I'm also going to make a couple copies because I want this to be in the right perspective and I also want it to be scaled correctly because the details scale is very important. This wrinkle is a little too big, so I can shrink it down. And as you know from watching part 1 in this collection, if I duplicate these, as long as it's the group that has the blending mode, not the individual layers, any amount of overlapping is fine. So I can make a bunch of copies of these and not have to worry about messy overlaps. But what I'm getting here is very carefully controlled amount of detail. If I hide it, you can see it doesn't change the overall contrast very much. I can put it in black and white mode to make that even more clear. So there's before and there's after. I got the details I was looking for without straying too far from my original image. And I don't need those to be multiple layers at this point. I could flatten those all down to be a single layer, but I do like having it still named just so I can stay organized. But that's what this process looks like. Identifying an area of the image, figuring out kind of what is the right type of overlay, but then making the changes in another document. Let's do two more. I want to do a list here and a big blueprint here. This is a light paper and I want to have dark details on it, which means the overlay is going to be a darkening mode, probably multiply. So I'll go on the internet and find some photos. And in this case, I found one that's pretty much correct already. This almost looks like it came out of a Xerox machine. What I want is a generally light background and dark details. So I'm going to use the levels adjustment layer and I'm going to clip it onto this image. So this is the only one we're adjusting here. I'm not going to use the info panel this time, but I am going to look at the histogram. And a nice thing to know about the histogram is if you make a selection and your source is set to entire image, what it's actually saying is entire image, so all the layers, but also just inside my selection. So like if I just did a selection on the blue sky here, it's essentially just 3 values total. If I did a selection around this, there would be 4 or 5. So a really nice way to just get information about the part you want to know about is just to make a selection and then to work on your adjustment layer. And so I'm looking at this and it's looking pretty good. What I think I want to do though is using my levels, I want to lighten some of the midtones and clamp down the dark. So I have essentially just black and white. Like that. I want it to be high contrast read. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I will do a merged copy. Come back into my image. I've already isolated the area I want it to be, and I've made a group and set this selection to be the group's mask. So now I paste in here and I can see it's already looking pretty good. I just need to get it in a better perspective. Get the scale looking pretty good. I think that maybe is a little too big. Okay, that looks fine. And then I set it to the correct blending mode, which in this case is multiply. Because all I want are the details to get darkened, but to leave the white of the page. Now in this case, I think that's too much contrast. And so sometimes if you only have a single overlay, you can actually just lower the opacity. And so here I'm still darkening, I'm just not doing it quite so prominently. Another way would be to lighten the contrast in the image itself. But I'm okay with that one, that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to do the blueprint, which I've already isolated the area. It's got the background blue in place that I'm looking for. I just want to add those white lines on top. So I want to have lightening details, which as you could guess by now is screen or add, either way. I start with a photo in its own document, and here I'm going to do my adjustments. Now in this case, I don't need the blue. This blueprint already has the blue background, but in my case, all I'm looking for are those white details. What I need to do then is to change it to be probably black and white to start with. So I'm actually going to do a hue saturation, pull the color out, and then using levels on top of that, I'm going to pull down the black point, probably add some contrast, and get rid of the midtones. Looking at my histogram, that's good. I have mostly black or nearly black. That means this is all going to be ignored. And then the white, we'll have to make sure that that's actually white. So I can just check with the color sampler, and sure enough, that is pure white. Good. I think this will work just fine. So I then make a flat copy, go back into my image, I go into the correct group called blueprint, paste. Now it's just a matter of getting it in the right perspective such that my scale looks good and it kind of matches the rest of the image. And now I'm going to change the whole group to the screen blending mode. Or if I wanted to, I could try add for a little more contrast. And once again, this is a little too prominent, so I can just lower the opacity to control how bright it is. Remember, my goal is to not deviate too much from my original values. It's so easy to accidentally add in too much contrast as you add extra photos into your image. But I think that's pretty good. What I see here is clear details. The original blue of my underpainting is intact. I've just added a little bit of photographic nuance. I've kind of added some storytelling without really deviating too much from my mission. But not all photos are going to work perfectly well flat. In this case, I wanted my blueprint to have kind of a wave to it, as if it's tacked onto the wall in a few places, but it's not perfectly ironed flat. So in the next video, we're going to look at how we can kind of integrate these better with a few of the warp tools.